I'm Julia, and today I would like to talk about specifically volunteer management. Kim talked about the boards and our most dedicated volunteers. Francois was a volunteer and talked about how to engage them and manage them. I would like to talk about real tools and platforms, the how-to of volunteer management. And I would like to focus on 7 stages of kind of steps that are important in that process. So Francois was a volunteer and still is, and I am as well in multiple organizations. But I also got a chance to manage volunteers in a project that I had, and I found that role to be very intense, very rewarding, but very intense. There's a lot of steps that taking place here, and I had to manage only 5. So those of you who manage more than 5, chapeau, like we say, because it is a lot of work, a lot of coordinations. And luckily, I mean, I had Salesforce to help me manage my 5 volunteers. But what are the steps and how we can break it down to look at them? Well, first, there's an application process, right? So many organizations who we work with have an application form that it goes either to mailbox, or even worse, sometimes it's just a paper form. People call in and the information stays on their Post-it notes or paper, and that kind of creates a dead end, because then it's very hard to evaluate them in the next step. It's very important to know when the people are available, what's their interest, have they complete their police check, and all the other attributes that are important for your specific case, for your organization. Once we recruit them and train them and we confirm their availabilities, then there comes the task of actually assigning them a job, a shift, and here's a lot of logistics around where to go. Do they need a specific additional training and to coordinate, and what do they do? All those details could be very difficult to manage. And with that, we need to, even when we found that person, we need to make sure we communicate, remind them where to go and when to show up, because, they necessarily not like employees and know what they need to do. Then internally as an organization, it's very important to record the hours. The government requires it. We report them in our annual reports. These numbers are very important for funding. Step number 6 is often overlooked. We don't collect enough of our volunteer feedback, or if we do, we don't necessarily act on it. It's a very simple step, and I'll show you a couple of tips how you can get started there. Number 7 is most strategic step of collecting the insights and looking at the data and statistics that you do collect about your volunteer hours, and contemplating of how you can translate those insight and data into intelligence, and what you can do to actually use those numbers to guide your organizations further. So step number 1 is application process. As Francois said, depending on what your segment of volunteers that you're targeting, they might be coming through either a phone or some other source. Maybe they do need that still paper form to complete because that's most comfortable for them. Most organizations now use some kind of electronic application process. Salesforce does come with its own predefined volunteer form that integrates with your CRM. And as well, we often use a JotForm. A JotForm is a platform that you can get for free. Actually, 5 forms are free in general, but nowadays they have announced unlimited free editions for nonprofit organizations, given that so many nonprofits need help to go digital. And we love JotForm because it can be very easy to customize, yet when we want to make it very fancy, so to say, and put some integration and branding around the forms, you certainly can. The forms are bilingual, so if you're in Quebec, often we see Google Forms that are using the same field that is repeated in English and in French, so making it very user unfriendly and difficult to read. So in JotForm, you actually just flip it to different languages. There's a wide range of integrations. Those who know me, I like the tools that talk to one another and not stay in its own silo. So JotForm integrates with a range of different platforms. Is also available through Zapier. So it brings me to a point that whatever application form that you use it, make sure it doesn't stay where it in its original source, but rather it's transferred to your central, whether it's CRM, whether it's your global Google Sheet. Make sure that your data is transferred to a place where all of your application live, because if not, it's just a waste of your time, a waste of people's time applying as well, because if you don't consolidate them, they will just stay where they came from. In the next step, as people applied, often characteristics, we don't give it too much of a thought. Either we collect too much or we don't collect enough. And, it's actually a very important step to get what you need and not more, because forms do need to be somewhat concise, otherwise they're too long to complete. Mostly wide characteristics that we use are availability, skills, interest, and commitment. As Francois said, are you available to work, recurrently, because we want that recurrence. For example, here we would also rate our volunteers, something that we probably don't do enough when we evaluate our volunteers, because you as a volunteer manager probably know who are your best volunteers and who maybe not so great. And this is the way for you to kind of keep track of who you would like to invite to come back and what other suggestions you would have for those who maybe not so much. And all information is centralized in their profile. So as you see here, we work with a lot of shelters, and where police check, for example, is very important, whether it's a new one is due, when did they sign a confidentiality agreement, bringing everything together into their profile. And you don't have to have a Salesforce to have a profile. You can do that still in your Google Sheet, basically create those columns that are you think important, and they will grow and evolve as your time progresses. And will actually, you will see which attributes are not important, because those columns and in Salesforce, actually the fields will be empty. So with the time you will question yourself, well, we're not collecting what the people signed the media release consent. So maybe it's not that important. We think it's important, but it's not, because we're not completing it. So having a profile for each volunteer, actual and perspective, is very important. So you know what your volunteer body looks like. So here's an example how we would search it. In Salesforce, there's a very cool feature that's called Find Volunteers, that whatever criteria you have for in a volunteer profile, you can search it. So if you're searching only for active volunteers who speak English, and only, let's say, females who are available on a Sunday and know how to do websites or have a camera or have a car, you can plug in those criteria and you'll be able to find, system will suggest you those who meet the criteria. And you don't have to have Salesforce. This is basically filters. If you are thinking about your Google Sheet, filters on your columns to pull out those who meet the criteria. Next comes assigning the shift. So you found the volunteer, you got their criteria, yes, they are available, but in order to organize your work, you need to create some kind of hierarchies or structure to your projects. And this is how we recommend to do it. This is how Salesforce does it, and I find that it's very effective. Could be a little bit long to build in the beginning and get the hang of how the actual flow works. It is most effective to organize your projects into hierarchies. So let's say you have projects. A major project could be a food drive or a special effort, an event. Underneath that, you will create certain jobs. So you will have a greeter, you will have a volunteer coordinator, you will have somebody who will do the cleanup, and then you'll go into the shifts. So in a cleanup team or a maintenance team that will be helping you with the post-event activities. How many shifts you have, meaning who comes in from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m., who comes in from 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. And that way, you know exactly when people are coming and who is coming when, to which job and to which specific project. Again, you don't have to use Salesforce, but that gets really, very detailed when you try to do it in Google Sheet. But organization takes time to plan and to put in place, but it's very rewarding when you have a large event going on and a big activity, because it will give you transparency in terms of not only logistics, but after, when you're reporting and look at the history, you'll be able to easily pull up who came when, why, and if something happens, you can always retrace those people who've been assigned to a certain shift, certain time. So here's an example how we do it in Salesforce. Here we have a job. We have a grocery delivery for actually COVID is a campaign. We have a grocery deliveries. We have a recurrence of the jobs and all the shifts that were created assigned to that specific job. And then we can, from here, we actually even see how many volunteers have been match with a certain shift and how many volunteers are missing, because the number that is always we look at is delta. How many do we still need in a specific shift or in a specific job? With that brings me to my step 4 and 5, communication, logistics, and volunteer hours. I find that step is most labor intensive as far as process. So if anywhere you would invest in this particular step. And here how it traditionally works in the sector. So when you have, when you need somebody for a job, you are gonna go either do a posting or go and search your database or your Google Sheet where you have volunteers. You would contact them and they say, hey, Julia, are you available from 9 to 5? You need to have a car, and this is the activities that you will be doing. I might respond right away. I might respond later. And then if I do respond, you need to remind me a couple of times, Julia, your shift is coming up. Please don't forget to show up because we're counting on you. So that option 1 of prior to the shift activities, this is how we traditionally, at least how I see people get volunteers to do a certain job. And here's another thought. What if we do it in a different way? What if we, and this is the column in the middle is option 2. What if we treat our volunteer needs as organizational companies treat jobs? I mean, the only difference in this scenario is really that we're not necessarily providing monetary compensation for their services, but the idea is the same. What if we publish a job and say, hey, we are looking for help with this specific event, and this is what you will do during that task. Here are the times when I'm going to need you. Here are the requirements that you will need to meet in order to help us out. You need to have white shirt and black pants and know how to say hello in both languages, for example. So those could be the requirements, and post it as a job and have some kind of automation process then to approve those volunteers. Because I hear from a lot of organizations that people say, well, yeah, but I want to be able to select who will actually do the job. And I completely understand that, because like we discussed, you want to choose the best volunteer for the job. Well, in Salesforce, we have a process where people can apply for a job, either current volunteers or prospective volunteers. Everyone can apply for a specific volunteer post or job. And then you as a volunteer manager will approve those who you think have the best fit. And furthermore, all the reminders for the shift, for the upcoming shift, those can be certainly automated. And that's when the CRM comes into play. So that process, I find that the communication, the reminders, and finding the right person for the job takes a lot of time. But we're not done here, because after the person shows up, you also need to take attendance. Did they show up? So basically confirm their hours. So this step, at least when I was managing volunteers, would take me a lot of time, even though I had people who would be a good fit. Sometimes I will have multiple people apply for the same shift and not enough for the other shifts. So by being able to approve them and have them apply to a specific job helped me to kind of elevate that step. So here's an example how Fondation Logique actually does it. So they here posted a specific job for they're looking for graphic designer, volunteer, and here they send exactly what they need. What you're going to do, the Facebook banner, the visuals. We would like you to know how to use Photoshop, and be execute quickly and be on time. And if you want to apply, you apply specifics to this job. And when you apply to speak to this job, on the right hand side, you guys see that that's form. Once it completes, that doesn't go to the generic place where all the volunteers are. It actually puts them in a specific bucket that this person who applies interested in this specific role. That gives so much context to the person who will be who's applying for the job, because they're not just volunteering for anything. They know exactly what they're going to do. They know when and what's expected of them. And this form is standard from Salesforce, and the organization did it themselves, which is pretty cool. Next step is a follow-up. The follow-up process, usually by the time we get to the follow-up with our volunteers, we are so tired from the logistics and the management and the communications and the reminders. So boy, I don't, I can certainly understand why we forget to follow up with our volunteers. If you're very advanced and want to have a complex process, you can put again the JOT form to collect that feedback. Or even a simple email template like, hey, thanks for your help. How did it go? Would you like to share what you enjoyed? And would you like to, help us to improve your experience? And how would we do that? So that email does not have to, live somewhere, as long as you can create a simple Gmail template and Outlook template to send it to your volunteers after the shift and collect that feedback. Maybe not necessarily needs to go to a database, but something that you can understand how the experience went. Maybe there's been something that they wanted to share with you, but you didn't ask, so they didn't say. And the key is keep it short and keep it simple. Your objectives here is to understand what people enjoy the most and how you can get better. And then finally, intelligence and strategy. Often, all the nonprofits, registered nonprofits, are required to report their volunteer hours. Either those are board hours, those are also volunteer hours for reporting. A lot of food banks run on a lot of volunteers, many organizations do. And we all collect the data on what kind of jobs, what kind of activities they do. But as Francois has mentioned, 66% of volunteers also donate. So I often ask the people we work with, our clients, how are you using your volunteers? And often I see that they're being put in a completely different category of labor versus somebody that you need to steward and engage. I know one organization that actually takes the volunteer hours from their volunteer hours that they collect, and they translate them into dollars, and that enables them to have a conversation with their funders to say, hey, last year we have spent 10,000 hours that came from volunteers, and that means that our organizations that translates to so many dollars that we are able to rally ourselves from our volunteer body. Isn't that amazing? So being able to create those stories with data is very powerful. And what does it mean when hours comes from a certain job but not from the other job? That means many things, and that's a conversation that you need to have within the organization. And Francois brought a very good point about how do you steward and engage your volunteers in your fundraising efforts? Because if you are a volunteer at YMCA and you're a tutor and you receive the same solicitation request from them to support them further, I'm not surprised that you'll be disengaged, because like, wow, these guys obviously don't even know that I'm a volunteer, and the conversation that they should be having with me is not the same that they should be having the conversation who doesn't volunteer. So being able to segment your volunteers to a different category and properly engage them as long as you can identify, hey, Francois, you're a volunteer as well, and we appreciate your support. Would you be willing to consider us becoming a donor as well, since you know what kind of work we do? So once a month, take that look into your metrics and really understand what they mean and what strategy you need to guide them into deepening the relationship with your volunteers, because they're your most dedicated supporters. Really quickly about Unibur and what we do. So what we, cloud is our space, and we do everything that's to do around Salesforce and the network around Salesforce, other cloud technology tools. So we basically implement Salesforce, and we'll take your processes of the nonprofits and customize a solution for you to make sure it fits your purposes. And many organizations don't know, but Salesforce is actually free 10 licenses for the CRA registered charities. This is obtained from the salesforce.org. And often I hear that people say like, oh, Julia, Salesforce is only for big companies. And I always tell them, no, actually we specialize in small and medium nonprofits implementations of Salesforce, because we think that you're the ones who need the most help in getting onto a powerful tool like Salesforce. We have clients where we have one user, and we have even some organizations where the entire Salesforce is run by volunteers. So myth, Salesforce is only for big guys, for sure.